So a common question that comes up every so often is when women ask me, why didn't you and Daniel live together before you were married? Because no, Daniel and I did not live together before we were married. This was super countercultural. It was totally different. Everyone was saying, save money, really get to know each other, learn if you're compatible, do not marry someone until you have lived with them. That is what I heard from so many people. So the decision that we made to not live together before we were married was totally different and is something that not a lot of people do anymore. Admittedly, I had no idea what marriage would be like. I had no idea what it would be like to join my life with this other person. I didn't know how it would look as Daniel and I merged our lifestyles, we merged our countries and our cultures together in one home, the home that we shared together after our wedding. I didn't know the little or big annoyances that would come up as we learned to live with one another, as we learned to be both husband and wife and roommates all at the same time. I didn't know how any of those things would go. And one thing I do know is that after our wedding, the day after our wedding on December 31st, our lives looked totally and completely different. My life changed all in one moment. In one moment, we said our vows to one another and Daniel became a husband and I became a wife, and it was absolutely beautiful and absolutely amazing, but our lives together changed forever. And the next day we went home to the new home that we were sharing together. And I wanted to share with you 3 reasons why we chose not to live together before we were married. The first reason that's kind of obvious is that we were saving sex for marriage. We had chosen to live out chastity together, and that was a challenge enough in and of itself. Living with a person you're madly in love with and not giving into the temptation when you are spending so much time alone in the same little space, not giving into that temptation is what I would think nearly impossible. Presenting ourselves with that situation of living together in the same house, even in different rooms, of spending all of that time alone, that would have presented us with so many temptations to abandon the decision that we had made together to save sex for marriage. And staying true to that decision that we had made together would have been infinitely more challenging than it already was. In order to keep up that promise that we had made and that decision that we had made together, we decided living together wouldn't be a good idea. The second reason why we didn't live together until we were married was that I didn't want the day after my wedding to be the same old story. I didn't want to go home to the same house that we had shared for 6 or 8 months before, sleeping in the same bed that we had the week before together. I didn't want it to be the same story. I wanted everything to be radically different because the choice that we had made to say vows one another radically changed our lives, and it radically changed who we were and what we were about. And I wanted our living situation to reflect that, to reflect the radical difference. On our wedding day, we entered into a covenant with God. We promised our lives to one another, and our situation and all of our circumstances the day after reflected that, of moving in together, of sharing one space. Everything reflected those vows that we had made to one another. And those vows built a foundation for our sharing of a home, that I shared a home with a man who had promised his life to me and who I knew would be there, and didn't have the opportunity, the next day or 2 days after to just pick up and leave and say, oh, I'm breaking up with you, but that he promised his life to me, and that was the foundation that our home together was built on. And that leads into the third reason. On our wedding day, within the sacrament that we entered into, we became one person. It's crazy and it's cool. And a gal told me once, she said, Emily, my mom said that getting married to a person you have never lived with is like buying a car that you've never test driven. Thankfully, Daniel is not a Toyota, and marriage is not like buying a car. Our living habits, the way Daniel lives or cooks or, treats the microwave, will not dissuade me from making this so-called purchase that people think that this marriage is when they use the analogy of buying a car. So we became one person, and we joined our lives together completely when we said our vows to one another. And our choice to live together for the first time the day after our wedding was an outward reflection of that choice, that we had joined our lives, we had joined our bodies as one together, and living together, sharing our money, doing all of those things together after our wedding was an outward reflection of becoming one on our wedding day. Would we have both been saving money if we lived in the same apartment before we got married? Yes. Would it have been easier to come home on December 31st knowing what drives us crazy about the way the other person lives? Perhaps. But would the difficulty of learning about the way that Daniel lives and operates as a human being in his home supersede the love that I had for him? Absolutely not. That I had vowed to love Daniel all the days of my life. And the way that he lives or treats his laundry or whatever that may be would not dissuade me from loving him and wouldn't take away from my love for him, because my love for him is not based on the way that he operates or the way that he lives. My love for him is based on so much more than that. Yes, there are things that will come up in marriage. You are sharing a bed, you're sharing, a shower, you're sharing all these different kinds of things that you can pay attention to so much about the way a person lives, a way a person treats their hygiene, a way the person treats their life before you ever get married to them without living with them. Was our wedding day a huge change in our lives? Absolutely. We experienced so many changes. We went from living apart to living together. We went from not having sex to having sex with one another. We went from not sharing a bank account to sharing a bank account. And everything was radically different, but it was radically beautiful. Honestly, it's been so exciting. It was such a thrill to have everything be different after I got married, and to be home and to wait for Daniel to come home after work, and the excitement that neither of us had to leave, that we lived in the same place and we shared a bed. That was so exciting, and it was so new, and I loved the newness and the excitement of that. Cheesy though it may be, sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night and I look over and I'm like, oh my gosh, that's my husband. I'm living in this house and there's a person in my bed, and it's my husband. It's a man who promised his entire life to me, and it's so crazy and it's so beautiful. And yes, everything was totally different. And yes, it was a whole new life. And yes, there were challenges that were presented to us in moving in together after our wedding, but I wouldn't trade those challenges for anything. And communication was such an important part of working through those challenges, of just being able to talk through things, was so key. And our process of living together has been honestly very, very smooth, because we know how to talk about things, we know how to bring things up, and we know how to communicate with one another, and that has been absolutely key. Chastity is not convenient, and living God's way is not always convenient, and maybe it doesn't help you save money, and maybe there are challenges that are presented that people who live together before they're married don't have. But if we were given the opportunity to do it again, we would not live together until after we were married. We are so glad that that's the choice that we made. Was it totally worthwhile when Daniel scooped me up and carried me over the threshold into our little home in Southern California, and everything in our lives had been transformed all at once? Absolutely. That's all for today. That answers the question for you. We'll talk to you soon. Bye!